Welcome everybody to the Campus Compact webinar. This is building thriving partnerships between colleges and local government. I'm Elaine Ikeda with California Campus Compact, and I'm hosting today's webinar. And I want to welcome you all here. I am joining you from the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone and the coastal Miwok on the San Francisco Peninsula. And I do want to give a maximum amount of time to our presenters today. So I'm going to keep this introduction short. If you have questions that come up during this session, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll have time to address them during the last 15 minutes of this session. This session is being recorded, so you will be able to view it again on the Campus Compact webinar page in probably 2 to 3 weeks, just in time for the holidays. So you are in for a treat today, as we have representatives from 2 of our California Campus Compact urban institutions with extensive experience partnering with and or working for city government, along with 1 current county government representative who also has deep roots with one of our local colleges. So they will be sharing their reflections, recommendations, and lessons learned on how colleges can effectively partner and engage college students with local government. They will share their perspectives on how to build thriving partnerships and that reflect the values of equity, justice, and inclusion. So I will just briefly tell you who our panelists are, and they can say more during their introductions. So we'll begin first with Anthony Tirado Chase, who's a professor and head of the Young Initiative on the Global Political Economy, Diplomacy and World Affairs at Occidental College in Southern California. Derek Brown, the director of the Leo T. McCarthy Center for Public Service and the Common Good at the University of San Francisco, and Maribel Martinez with the County of Santa Clara, and who also for nearly a decade was the director of the Cesar Chavez Community Action Center at San Jose State University. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Maribel because she's joining us today on her birthday. So some birthday love for Maribel. Thanks for being here on your special day. So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony. Go ahead and get us started.
Great, thanks so much. I really appreciate that, Elaine, and it's been really great to meet Derek, and happy birthday, Maribel. So I just put into the chat 3 questions just to guide my presentation, just so without having to have a PowerPoint, you all can follow along. But basically, it's just a simple, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how can we advance the goals that Elaine just mentioned? So what is it? What do we do at Occidental College? The Young Initiative on Global Political Economy in terms of our partnership with the Los Angeles Mayor's Office. Basically, it dates back 4 or 5 years ago. Let me just start my clock here. For about 4 or 5 years, we've been partnering in what we call task force, working with the mayor's office, or really I should say specific clients within the mayor's office. It's obviously a huge bureaucracy, on different ways in which we can translate global norms into local policy. And that started with, some of you may have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, UN elaborated principles on equitable, sustainable economic development. How can that be expanded into local policy here in Los Angeles, or maybe I should say city policy here in Los Angeles? And we do that via what we call a task force structure. We set up a team of undergraduates working as a group under the guidance of the faculty advisor with knowledge, obviously, of the particular issue area. And this is usually at Occidental College, but frankly, we've also done them across institutions, which I think has been really worthwhile. So with colleagues at USC, colleagues at Pomona, we've actually had cross-university task force working with the city of LA and specific clients in the city of LA. Just to say something about the faculty side and the student side here. This is from the faculty side, aside from being cross-institutional, this is also very much interdisciplinary. In some sense, you think working with the mayor's office, I'm in the Department of International Relations, it makes sense to work with their Department of International Affairs. But in fact, we've worked with, I've sort of brokered these task force with the biologists on our faculty working to document biodiversity and loss of biodiversity in Los Angeles, working with an environmental scientist on how to constitute just transitions, working with public health experts. So there are a myriad of ways from many different disciplines that with some faculty guidance, student groups can work to inform city policy with norms and with ideas and with potential policies that might not otherwise occur to those particular city experts. So whatever the composition of the task force, whatever the topic, they have a boss. The boss is not the faculty member. The faculty member sort of plays an advisory role and an intermediary role, but essentially the reporting goes to a city client. They're the ones who say, this is the sort of deliverable that I can put into action. This isn't meant to be a theoretical exercise. I want a real deliverable that I can then bring to my colleagues, to the city council, to the mayor, whoever it is, and see if this can be put into action. So student task force working directly with city departments has been the focus of this sort of work. And again, I've already mentioned a few issues, but it's been broad: poverty, climate change, people living without homes, just transitions, gender equity, all issues key to a broad sustainability agenda here in Los Angeles. And I'll just add maybe two more notes. One, these can be very specific. For example, transportation for LGBTQI youth living without homes so they can better access city and county services. I mean, that's I think a sample of a very specific project that someone in city government spotted this as a need, but wanted to see what are the best ways to accomplish that. And our students delivered a report on that. The one I'll mention, and maybe just a touch more detail to kind of fill out the picture of what we do, is one I've been leading in terms of a so-called truth and reconciliation process, or truth and accountability process around the history of racial injustice in Los Angeles. So let me describe that to you, because it's probably the one I know best, but it's also the one we've done most recently. So I'll say just really three things about that in terms of background. One, some of you may be aware that really there's been a spread throughout the US in the wake of the 2020 Black Lives Matters demonstrations to initiate the idea of truth commissions to come to terms with our various histories of racial injustice across the United States. Now, this has been proposed. Barbara Lee has legislation for this at the federal level, but that's not really where the action is. Right now, where this has really moved beyond just proposals, but into actual action, has been at the city level, somewhat at the regional level. There's the Maryland, for example, the Maryland Truth and Reconciliation Commission as well. But mainly it's been cities doing that. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing via Zoom, the wonders of Zoom, a lot of the practitioners on the ground in different cities and parts of the US. Lots of variations in their approaches to how they do this, but one common notion: the global norms that I think many people have heard about, Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, et cetera, that global norm can inform local reckonings with the ongoing impacts of racial injustice across the United States. I don't think it's radical to say that the US has been somewhat stagnant in terms of advancing its ability to come to terms to reckon with that history. So that's one element of background. The second element in the context of Los Angeles is that there's a particular reason why LA might see global norms as relevant. We all know LA has a long history of racial eruptions: Watts riots, 65, 92 Rodney King explosions, the protests in 2020. And I guess the point is a lot of the local attempts to deal with that, court consent decrees regarding LA Police Department, consent decree regarding redlining, post-riot commissions such as McCone and Christopher, have simply failed to address the core causes of those eruptions. And I think there's a broad recognition between community groups and city officials that there's been a real breakdown in trust, and there needs to be a different mode of communicating, of addressing these issues. And that's what led to our coming together, an expansion of our cooperation with the mayor's office into work with the Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, who's also Chief Equity Officer for Los Angeles, to extend the work we've been doing on the SDGs into a project on how LA can learn from best practices globally and nationally in terms of how to constitute a potential truth and accountability process for Los Angeles. So again, just to go back to the what's of this, that work, research into how that could be done, has been done by a student task force under, in this case, my supervision, but always reporting to Brenda Shockley and her deputy, Zita Davis. So that's in terms of the first issue I wanted to cover. The second is, why is this useful pedagogically? You know, true academic partnerships with city governments might seem like a pipe dream, but when they work, I really believe they can expand education beyond the limits of what many students and teachers dream is possible from within the traditional classroom bubble. The students who've constituted the, I think it's 13, 14 distinct task force that we've overseen, have been active participants in shaping the scope and approach in each project, learning by doing, which requires them both to master background academic material and to deal with the opportunities and constraints of city structures, which is an education in and of itself. When it works, it's because of strong engagement from city partners, hopefully good oversight from faculty, but more than anything else, engaged students who are able to accept shifting goalposts and other changes beyond any one person's control. And obviously there's frustrations in that. I've felt those frustrations. Students have certainly felt those frustrations, but that's in some sense the beauty of this. This isn't an isolated classroom experience. You're dealing with real world programming, policymaking. It moves us beyond the abstract and into the complexities of practice that can only be imagined, discussed from a college campus. So they're getting not just academic skills, but also non-academic skills, such as relationship building, trust, the need not just to be creative, but flexible in terms of dealing with multiple real-world stakeholders. The realities of what it takes to collaboratively create a quality set of implementable policy suggestions are far different than many of the assumptions one will have just in an isolated classroom. And I guess the key here is moving from being consumers of knowledge into producers of knowledge. Students are not only mastering academic ideas, but also how to make them matter in the world. I guess I'll just finish this section by saying two things. I'm committed to this model. We're committed to this model because it simply works. Students are more engaged than ever. They acquire incredible academic skills and, as I've just been saying, real world skills as well. So it really works to expand learning in radically new ways. And I guess I'll say more generally, it works to help us all, professors, students, city officials, to contribute to our cities, to our communities, to stimulating responses that create sustainable, systemic change. And I think that's really the key, a shared commitment to sustainability. So in terms of the third question, how can these sorts of partnerships be more sustainable and equitable? I won't talk a lot about this. Let me just share my screen really quickly. We've been working on a set of principles. Let me see if I can find preview. I need preview. Where is it? Which is, here it is. So these are, I've been working, given this ongoing work, to create a set of principles to make it so it's not just about our work with the LA Mayor's Office, but a set of principles to make these sorts of partnerships equitable and sustainable. And it's really come down to these four principles. And so I'll just kind of leave this up for you. I'm happy to maybe when we go on to the next speaker, while Derek is speaking, I can create a PDF and put it into the chat. But it seems to me that there does need to be a real grounding in some fundamental research principles if we're going to have collaborative long-term partnerships that have horizontal leadership, that respect the need for empathy when we work together, and that really lead to intellectually open, self-reflective learning and scholarship. And I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Anthony. And we'll turn it over to Derek.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anthony. Really appreciate it. You absolutely did an amazing job. Love that recap, and a huge act to follow. So I'll definitely try my best. Elaine, thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it. You absolutely put together an all-star crew. Maribel, just want to say happy birthday. And I got to say, 21 looks good on you. So congratulations and enjoy yourself today. To everyone, my name is Derek Brown, Senior Director of the Leo T. McCarthy Center at the Great University of San Francisco. And for myself, I'm a native of San Francisco, born and raised right here. Prior to coming over to USF, I was senior advisor to the last 3 mayors of San Francisco, also senior advisor to the chief of police of San Francisco, as well as liaison to the mayor's office. So I spent time on both sides, on the government side, but also now at a university. So for me here at the university, our main focus here at the center is to prepare students for a successful life in public service. That being said, one of my mottos is teamwork makes the dream work. And together, collectively, we could do some amazing work. So I'm all about partnerships. I'm all about building relationships. For example, a couple of our programs, we have like fellowship programs where we create opportunities based off our partnerships with the local government. We have like our City Hall Fellows program where we connect our students with opportunities within City Hall. So whether it's working at the mayor's office, working at the Board of Supervisors office, our city departments, working there. We also do the same thing for the state capitol and have students out in Sacramento working with legislators, and then also our USF and DC program where our students have the opportunity to learn firsthand from legislators, but then also really looking at providing impact to the city that we serve in our community. I think the amazing opportunity about that is like I touched on with, oh, and I see, yeah, we're gonna be dropping in some links as well in the chat. Thanks so much, Elaine. So what we're looking at doing is forging the relationships with our local government, seeing how our students could get involved, but then also look at ways that we can work together to solve, some challenging issues that we're having in the city. So case in point, food insecurity is huge out here in the city. And one of the things that we did here at USF was collaborate not only with the mayor's office, but Department of Public Health and others to look at ways that, we could come together to provide resources and food for families in need. So we have an incredible event called Feeding 5,000 under the leadership of Veronica Shepard with DPH. And we have our students and faculty and staff involved with city and county providing resources for families in need. In addition to that, for the holidays, we're also working closely with our local government and community partners to, this past November, we did, turkey giveaways where we fed families in need throughout our public housing sites. This December, we have our toy giveaways where we're providing toys and working in conjunction with the government as well as USF and our students to provide toys for kids in need. In addition to that, we also have a Christmas tree giveaway that we're putting together to uplift and support our families in need. So not only do we have our students out there, based off our partnerships and working closely with our local government, we're also working together to look at ways that we can solve some issues throughout the city. Again, I'm gonna continue to belabor this, but teamwork makes the dream work. And I think that that's something that here at the center we understand. We always are looking at ways that we can work together with our community-based organizations in conjunction with them to elevate the community we're working with, elevate the local government, and really be an asset within San Francisco. That being said, I think some of the takeaways, some of the tips that we have, when you're connecting with local government, one, it's important to understand who are your representatives and understanding that. But then also it's important to keep your contacts current and stay connected with them. But then also you want to continue to nurture that relationship and then also be able to constantly reach out to local government, keep them in the loop of the amazing work you're doing, and just keep them dialed in. Overall, I think that with the work we're doing here at the Leo T. McCarthy Center and our amazing staff that we have here, continue to go above and beyond for all of our amazing programs. And I know we're dropping in the chat ways that everyone could, get involved, reach out, reach out to one of these links. I'm happy to talk more, especially with Q&A. But again, I'm going to end this like I started it. Teamwork makes the dream work. And that's going to be a common theme with everyone today. But again, thank you so much for having me and looking forward to speaking more. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. And to the participants, please, feel free to keep writing your questions in the chat, and we'll come back to them after we hear from Maribel, and hopefully be able to answer any questions you have. I'm going to turn it over to the birthday girl.
Hello. Hopefully you can see my screen here as I present some slides. Oops, let me go right back. So good morning, buenos dias, Nari Eransku. My name is Maribel Martinez. And before I share a little bit about my work, it's important for you to know a little bit about who I am. I grew up here in San Jose, grew up in East San Jose. I'm the daughter of immigrants from Mexico who for a large part of my life were undocumented, and that shaped a lot of how I experienced the world around me. I am a public servant. I work for the County of Santa Clara. I'm the manager for the Division of Equity and Social Justice that oversees several policy offices. I'm also a lecturer at San Jose State University in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, and also in anthropology. I'm a researcher. I'm a community researcher. I'm really interested in the ways in which we tell stories of resiliency, particularly in creating cultural hubs that are informal. And I'm also a student of traditional healing arts and a community artist. And so I take all of these different elements into the work that I do. Professionally, I have about 20 years of experience.
Interrupt you really quick. If you're wanting us to see something, right now we're just seeing a blank screen.
Oh, okay.
So
Let me.
if you want to stop share and try again.
Sure. Can you see that now? Great.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Great. So for the in my professional scope for the last 20 years, I've been involved in public service through nonprofit and government work, bridging critical race theory, healing approaches, and equity. I have a master's in applied anthropology and a BA in political science with certificates in public policies from various universities around the US. My career really began as a community organizer, working with interfaith communities to build power and change local policy. For 9 years, I was the founding director of the Cesar Chavez Community Action Center at San Jose State University, where we supported students in experiential learning around civic engagement, from volunteerism to activism and advocacy. And then in 2016, I made the move to Santa Clara County, working for local government. And at that time, Santa Clara County was the first county in the United States to open an office of LGBTQ affairs. And so it was a groundbreaking work around LGBTQ inclusion in the way that local governments rolled out policies, practice, and programs. During my time here at the county, I've also been part of GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And it's looking at how we can advance equity across the county, but also in collaboration with other jurisdictions. For the last year and a half, as we respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, I was working in the Emergency Operations Center as a public information officer. We're looking at how we shared information with our diverse community. We instituted for the first time a language access team and also a Latinx messaging team, knowing that those were the communities that were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And currently, I still lead the efforts in our recovery side, working with our AFN MAC group, which is our access and functional needs and multi-agency coordination, really looking at those who are most vulnerable in our community, that include children, folks who are dependent on public transportation, who are in carceral and institutional settings, and folks who are limited access to resources. When I look at equity, for me, I borrow Cornell's West phrase of justice is what love looks like in public, and I translate it to say that equity is what healing looks like in public. That equity and social justice is about transforming public spaces to create the healing from historical racial trauma and opens up access to opportunities that previously were not available. And creates new futures. And so when we do this and we look at partnerships and we look at how we do the work, this work happens at the speed of trust. And that means that a tremendous amount of time has to be spent in building the relationships and cultivating the relationship. And that we may not see direct outcomes for a while as we build the relationship. And there'll be times in the relationship that it'll be tested. And those tests are important because they become those points of clarity and those points of deepening. And that these relationships need to be mutually beneficial. I think oftentimes, we see either researchers coming into a community, taking what they need and leaving, or we see that with local government as well. But there needs to be something that is exchanged, that is meaningful, and that it's iterative, that it's not a one-time kind of thing, because you have had this relationship, you have to honor the relationship. There's also needs to be an acknowledgement of the power dynamic and a leveling of that. Asking questions like, who's getting paid right now? Who gets to make decisions? Who has the final say? Can anyone leave or come in at any point? And so really understanding how power and privilege shows up in spaces is really important, particularly when we represent an institution or when we're asking folks to speak on behalf of their community. We need to honor multiple expertise, that our community members know exactly what their needs are and what the needs of their community are because they're deeply engaged, that we as researchers never assume that we know more or that we have the answer. And as academics, particularly working at CSUs or with first generation students, that we're often asking folks to engage or analyze with communities of which they feel they belong to or are closely affiliated to or resemble their communities back home. So there is a processing that needs to happen where they are both insiders and outsiders. And that reckoning with self, with our own assumptions, with our own biases, is very much part of the process in which we create knowledge. And then lastly, that it should focus on healing, that we need to be redemptive factors. Both local governments, but also higher ed institutions have long histories of injuries to communities of color. And how do we, through our actions, through the creation of our initiatives, begin to acknowledge, restore, repair, and transform the long history of interventions or interactions in these communities, and that we ourselves, as individuals, as our teams, as our students, are also part of this process, and so that we're not overburdening ourselves or creating harm to ourselves or others as we engage in this work, and to be very mindful, very embodied and focused, that when we talk about equity, that includes us too. And when we talk about restorative and transformative processes, that also includes the outcomes to ourselves and to the communities that we touch. And so when we engage in work, and I have kind of multiple viewpoints, as somebody in the classroom, as somebody working in local government and strictly in policy, and someone who's worked in an administrative role in higher ed, I think about really the foundation to my work is how do we provide pathways for the community to speak for themselves, the community to decide for themselves, and for the distribution of resources to go to those who are most impacted. Because I think for a large part, right, a lot of our decision making in local government particularly has been who is the largest number affected, right? Because that translates to votes for elected officials, or who is the loudest in advocating for themselves. And that usually is correlated to access and privilege. And so to shift to an equity lens is whose voice has not been engaged, whose voice needs to be most amplified, and who has the most to gain or lose when we implement a particular program or policy or practice. And it's those first voices that need to be most elevated. And when we talk about equity, it's not that we've heard from everyone, that's inclusion. But equity is how do we shift power to make sure that those voices who haven't been heard are actually heard most and loudest and in the biggest spaces. And so with that, I'll conclude my notes here, saying that, you know, when we look to equity, to build equity, we have to build it. It has to be intentional. Inequities didn't happen by chance. They were completely embedded into the way that we did the work through our institutions. And so it takes both people using their privilege and others using their experience to get to a new place of benefit to everyone.
Thank you, Maribel. So, wow. I had told these folks when we were doing our prep that I could actually sit and listen to each of them talk for hours probably, and yet we tried to squeeze them all into one webinar for all of you. So again, I invite you to post any questions in the chat box. And we do have one question, which from Meltonia and Anthony took a great stab at providing some answer context, but I want to open it up to the others. The question being, if you're at a two-year college where you don't have students with you for as long, you know, how can these programs be designed and the partnerships? Well, before I turn it over to you, I will just say one thing. I think that each of you hit on, whether it's teamwork makes the dream work, or the way the other two of you talked about it, it's the building trust in these relationships and relationship building that allows them for these partnerships to happen, which then create these opportunities for the students. So, but anyway, I want to open it up. That'll be our first question. And then we'll see what other questions there are, or if you as presenters have questions for each other. But anyway, let's take that first question about, you know, thinking about community colleges and, you know, as compared to the four-year institutions.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just for perspective, I went to a two-year college. I attended City College of San Francisco, and you know, it was one of the best experiences of my life. Not only was, you know, I was an older student, you know, first generation, but that's where I really learned how to navigate. You know, I couldn't necessarily, you know, ask my parents how to navigate. No one went to school, so I had to kind of just figure it out. But then I eventually transferred to UC Berkeley, crushed it over there. But before that, like I was saying, we're at City. Even if you're looking at like a two-year school and creating an opportunity, the relationships is so important, because you want to have those relationships established so that when you are working with students, and it may be 2 or 3 years, you can make those connections, you can create programs and keep it flowing. But if you have that established relationship and that understanding, it really makes things, you know, so much easier. Just case in point where I am now, you know, we have a lot of amazing programs, and we really wanted to, you know, place our students in different placements throughout the city. When I had tough time connecting, you know, prior to me getting here, however, due to relationships that I already had and that I nurtured throughout the years, you know, I was able to just, you know, pick up the phone and create this opportunity so our students can take advantage of that. So whether it's a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution, you definitely have to have those relationships established.
Yeah, and I would add that some of the biggest relationship building happens in the classroom. where you embed some of the equity frameworks into the way that you deliver instruction. And that team building, or that the relationship building with students, then also creates a vehicle for them to show up in a respectful, inclusive manner when they're out in the community. And to think about it, most students are planning semester by semester, or quarter by quarter, depending on what system. And so they're not necessarily thinking, oh, I have, all 4 years, what am I going to do? Some are thinking that way, but many of the students that I work with are, let me just get through the semester. And so even thinking about what are the different experiences or frameworks that I can impart to a student within, the 15, 16 weeks that we have together, in my case, as a semester system, that can plant the seeds or open the door for them to see themselves engaged in work with community. And we do in my class some service learning light, experiences that allow them to see themselves and what they're studying as a very viable, helpful, fruitful tool to move into community engagement or community development. And so even if it's small projects or experiences, reflections, those can go a long way in the trajectory of a student's career.
Thanks. Anthony, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think very much what Maribel and Derek spoke about really effectively in terms of trust and relationship building. But let me connect a little bit more on that to the other question that was posted by, well, I lost who it's by, but by somebody else. Yes. Oh, yes, by Star. So it seems to me that this trust element, it starts with, in some sense, the relationship with the client, the person we're going to be working with, that they have to be able to trust that students are going to be able to deliver. Why should we, we're professionals here. Why do we want some 19-year-old telling us what to do? And so you're always, I think, going to face that initial skepticism. And so part of this is it builds on itself, where if you can continue to show that, no, this is real results. They're really smart. They know what they're doing. And they have, let's face it, I'm older now. I'm not nearly as smart as they are. Kids that age can just absorb information and deliver it. So, but it is a matter of making sure that your client really has trust that their time is going to be well spent. They have, like I said, they're the boss, but that means they have to invest time in terms of interacting with the students, telling them what they want. And for us, it's built on itself, but I think we always face that initial resistance. But I think the second level of trust, and I think this connects more to what Maribel was talking about, is the students are there going to be like, okay, we're working for this governmental agency here. They've screwed us over time and time again. This is what does this matter? So you also need to be able to show that this is not just an abstract exercise, that their energy is going to be worthwhile. And again, it helps if you have a sort of history of doing this. You can say, listen, you think this is just nonsense, they're just going to ignore you, but this specific policy was put into place 2 years ago. But obviously you got to build towards that, which is not so easy. And I think that's where I want to get into Star's question in terms of preparation. And this, again, connects to the community college question, in that there's less years to do preparation. But I would say for our students, and I can maybe give a specific example in terms of the truth and accountability work, they probably all had an introductory class in international organizations where there was maybe a week, max 2 weeks on these sorts of processes around the globe. So they're by no means experts. And so with each of these task forces that we set up, the first probably quarter of the semester is essentially an intensive, research into the particular topic. So you kind of know this in general from an introductory class. Now we're really going to study it so you know more than the people you're working for. But then it gets into and then I guess the third element is you then have, our semester is 14 weeks, you have 10 students, let's say 8 to 10 students working intensively with all that energy and all that intellectual intensity that they can bring at that age. And that leads into a great deal of knowledge creation. You're trying to put on the students that you're producers of of knowledge. And I think that's really key here in terms of building up the ability to deliver a product. And so I think that's what's most key for us is really just a trust in the intelligence and engagement of the students, which again is circular in terms of their trusting that it matters and the client trusting that the students can really produce. So it's sort of a circular engagement, if you will.
I'm curious too, if you all have had to deal with the idea of, the university or college is on a specific timeline. Maribel mentioned they were on the semester system, but the government, these programs, these projects, the real work is not necessarily, compartmentalized in a time frame. So I just was curious if you found ways, and sometimes your project might straddle multiple semesters. So, what are the strategies that you've used to deal with, you might only have these students for this amount of time, but the project is going on, and how do you link and continue, et cetera?
Yeah, I know one of the ways that I look at that is even if you're working with college students, say for instance at a 4-year institution, they're there for 4 years. However, if you're working on a project, I know one of the things that's important to me is having a student, within each grade. So one or two from ninth, from the first year student, second year, et cetera, so that throughout the years, you'll always have some sort of consistency. Just because, speak to your point, when you're working on policy issues with the city, it's not like it's just, 4 months, you're gonna, have that policy pass or whatever the case may be. It may take a year or two, or in some cases more than that. So I think for me, that's important to do where you are working with students, you're just having it real diverse with the years, the students being there, so you can have some sort of consistency, because that could definitely be an issue where, just case in point, if you're working with a particular population and it's only, first year, or just say for instance, seniors, and it's 2 semesters that you're working with it, but the project is still going on with the city. And then you're, back to square one, trying to figure out, okay, now who can recruit? How can you do that? So that's some of the ways that I kind of remedy that as well.
I'm happy to take that on as well, if you'd like. First of all, as often happens when one answers questions, there was one thing I wanted to say beforehand that I, of course, forgot. So let me take the opportunity to say, it is true that students need to be brought up to a certain level, but it's also true that our clients are looking for expertise on something they don't know a lot about. So in terms of the example of a truth and accountability process, yeah, everyone's heard about, in South Africa, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But really, we already started with more knowledge of the international norms that go into that. So even if it's a limited amount of knowledge, you need to bring the students that level of knowledge up really quickly. You also start by, I think, finding an area where, the city's perfectly capable of doing a lot of things on their own. They don't need our help. When they come to us is on areas where they have a lack of knowledge and where maybe we have some value added. In terms of the time limit, we try to look at that as a positive. It's a 14-week semester, 4 weeks of intensive background work, 4 weeks of preparing a first draft, of doing research, 4 weeks of preparing a first draft, 2 weeks of presenting. That time limit, again, is very real world, and I think really stimulates the work in a positive way. Obviously, that has limits. So these are huge topics, and one could continue. In terms of the truth and accountability work, it was last spring semester, but we ended up doing a summer research project to continue the research, and this was specifically in terms of the interviews, a lot of the practitioners around the country who are initiating these sorts of truth and truth-telling commissions. But we try to look at that as an advantage, but I think that's an example of, we just continued it into the summer. I have another colleague working on the Change Network, a network of cities working on gender-related issues. That was last spring, and she'll be doing it again this spring. So again, with a new cohort of students, but building on the foundation that's already been constructed. So it's definitely a constraint, but you try to work with it and try to use it as an incentive to get work done more quickly and more intensively.
Maribel, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I would just add that also looking creatively at resources available. Are there students that could be on work study or a student assistant that could be those bridgers between the 2 semesters, or that can move the work forward either in the summer or winter period, can reorient students who are coming into the project. Oftentimes when there are projects with local government, there might be funds available to support some of that administrative or student resource labor. And so thinking about what are the structural supports that might be needed to really bridge between different cohorts, different semesters. Maybe there's funding through the department level, funding through the college or the university around engaged learning. And so I think thinking creatively of opportunities, not just for the work to continue, but for leadership development. Some students, might have started their first time, but you see that they've gotten, really engaged, really passionate about the work. How do you elevate that passion? How do you provide new opportunities? And so so doing some of that work and simply asking the question to the students themselves, how do you think we can continue this forward? What might be a good idea? Because they might say, oh, I'll come in and share my thoughts with the next class, or I'd like to continue on. Is there a possibility to do a special, 1 unit or 2 unit credit for me to continue on board? And so I think even just asking them how they might troubleshoot with you is a great opportunity to learn.
Thank you. I have another question. I think, yeah, we have time. And this I'm going to pose this question first to Maribel, and then Derek, you may have some additional thoughts coming from the mayor's office. And then obviously if Anthony wants to chime in too, but if I were a new administrator or faculty on a campus and I was wanting to reach out to partner with my county or my mayor's office, like, where do I go? And maybe I don't have those relationships. Like, how do I, like, other than my own representative or whatever, Maribel, is there an entry point to that I should?
And there are multiple entry points. I think if you have a relationship, maybe somebody that you just ran into, have their card, give them a call because you were maybe at the same event or have already, somewhat of connection, but definitely reaching out to your elected official, presenting an idea, presenting an opportunity for a partnership. It works probably faster if you have a concept in mind that you could ask, who might be the best person to connect around this. Most county websites have lots of information about their departments, about contact information. There's a lot of public information and public contacts that are available. So doing those cold calls is totally acceptable. As public servants, all of that stuff is public information. So if we don't get back to you, you could say, well, you could talk to your, elected official and say, I've sent 10 emails to the Department of Corrections and they haven't got, you could. But most people will respond to you. And if you're saying, here, I have something to offer, that's also really great, right? Because most entities have a tremendous amount of work. And particularly, in the last 2 years where we've had workforce shifts, and many of us have been reassigned as disaster service workers, and departments have been operating at very minimal capacity, to be gifted the opportunity to innovate, to be gifted the opportunity to engage with new energy, new communities, and to have additional support come in is such a wonderful idea. And so if folks who are thinking about, doing some of these projects, absolutely include your elected officials, absolutely reach out to counties. And oftentimes there might even be some resources or support, whether it's elevating the project or some actual financial support awarded. Those are possibilities. Right now, we have several mini grants that we have in the community around projects related to equity, social justice, and hate crime, hate incident prevention that we're awarding to individuals, to organizations, to schools and nonprofits. And so there might be lots of opportunities, particularly right now, because counties and local governments have a responsibility to respond to what's happening in the community, but there might be resources and supports available. And of course, if good work is happening that's benefiting the community, I think everyone wants to be a part of that, and take, even if it's just a small piece of credit for really great work. So share your idea, ask questions about who else should I talk to, where could I find some funding, are there additional resources that are available? Asking those types of broad questions to everyone you encounter is a great way to build support and momentum for the work that you're doing.
Maribel, you knocked that question out of the park. I second that. You are absolutely correct with everything you touched on. And the elected officials, they're here for us. We are their constituent. They're here to serve us. And I know one thing that I'll add is also physically go to their office, go to City Hall, go to City and County and connect with them. And one of the things that they love, and just speaking from experience, just working in City Hall for several years, I love when individuals will come out, especially from the university, to come introduce themselves, let us know about some of the research they're doing. Also love when they brought students over, and when they told us about an opportunity that they have access to students that want to intern, that want to work and want to collaborate, I was always all in. So like I say, just to add to what you said, just go out to City Hall, go to the departments and kind of understand the elected officials and some of their priorities. And more often than not, we have a lot of priorities that align with them. So definitely just go out there, but they are here to serve us and support us as constituents. So thank you.
Anthony, did you want to add anything?
Not much. I'm with Derek. I Maribel just hit that out of the ballpark. So I'm not going to just repeat what she said basically. But I will add one thing, which is I just put into the chat an article that was co-written, and this includes student perspective, undergraduates and graduate. The lead writer was actually a former undergraduate, worked with me, now a graduate student at USC, faculty and city partners. And I think it shows it tries to give a kaleidoscope of what essentially Maribel was saying. This is a win-win. This is a good thing for everybody. You have people working in the mayor's office who aren't just doing this because they want to be nice to students. They're doing it because it works for their interests. So if everyone wants to open up that link, you might find that it's short, a very short article, not a long academic article, but it might be helpful to just use that to demonstrate to potential partners, hey, this is the promise that we're talking about here.
Thank you very much. And I agree, there's a lot that's on the websites if you go, and there's all these different commissions and committees and going to your city council meeting and things like that. So lots of places where you could start at least initially looking for information and finding out who are the people. And a lot of stuff is very issue focused. So it's easy to, if you are very issue focused or discipline focused, it's easy to find some venues there. We are just about out of time. So I want to thank our not our participants for sure. Thank you so much for showing up. And I hope you have found this webinar to be very informative and enjoyable, and you will be getting an evaluation possibly in the next 24 hours following this webinar. And as I mentioned, it will be posted in a few weeks on the Campus Compact website. And I put that link right in the chat because you can go to the webinar page and they show up there. And so you can also look at past webinars that have happened in the preceding months. And see what's coming up as well and register for any upcoming webinars. I want to thank our panelists. You guys were fabulous. I'm so glad that you all said yes when I reached out to you to ask if you would be a participant in putting together. I knew that we had a lot of good information we could share, and happy to have California represented. So I just really want to thank you, and you're getting some kudos in the chat as well. So any last parting comments? I'll start with Anthony and then Maribel and Derek. Any last words?
No, but the only thing I'll say is I think we need to radically restructure higher education. And this is one of, in a lot of ways, but this is one way to really devolve the power, empower students, still academically rigorous, but about creating change. What's better than that?
Maribel, any last word?
Yeah, this is important and impactful work. And for the administrators who are in faculty who are doing this work, please keep doing it. We need you to keep doing it. And you're absolutely not doing it alone. Please count on us to be your thought partners, to be co-creators, to be your biggest cheerleaders in the work that you're doing. But please continue to do it.
And last but not least, Derek.
Hey, save the best for last. Let's do it. Let's do it. I got to say, just continue to establish those relationships, nurture those relationships, and most importantly, do not forget, teamwork makes the dream work. So thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.